Hello, my name is Alyssa Lytle. I am a graduate from Kutztown University, and I wanted to take some time today to share with you the research I've gotten the opportunity to look into here at Kutztown with the Honors Program. So, over the last few semesters, I've been doing some research and discovery into what art education looks like for students who are visually impaired. So, today I'm going to share with you just a brief presentation of what that would look like. So let's get started. So the title of my project is A Sensory Experience in Art, using an awareness of visual impairments to engage the use of all five senses in the art world. And so when I started thinking about this project, I was thinking about how limiting it can be when we look at arts and just a visual sense. There are plenty of art forms that speak to our taste, our hearing, our touch, so many different things that I thought it'd be important to explore that within this line of research. So, like I mentioned, I wanted to take a look past the visual in visual arts, what is focused on in classrooms K to 12. But that idea can often pose a real limitation for some students. In this case, we're looking at students who have visual impairments. Students who have limited visions, are blind, or if they just see things differently, can be left behind in an art classroom and then begin to believe that they are not capable of being a successful artist. So I started this line of research because of those students who might be left behind or limited. I've had experience not only in art education, but as a student myself, to witness where my peers may be struggling. In specific, I've noticed students with color blindness and how that impacts their learning in the art classroom. And so, taking a look beyond visual impairments further, this research and written curriculum has two goals. The first, to provide adaptations and insights to artistic success within students with visual impairments. And secondly, to incorporate an education for all students about diversity and disability by looking at it and making art in new ways, especially through all five senses, not just visually. So, through my research, I started curating it so that I would be looking into physical resources for students who are visually impaired. But as I continued to read articles and have interviews with students, I found it was more important to share that awareness of how people create differently in general, not specifically just visual impairments, where my research focuses on that, but also in the broader classroom to create a safe and important community within the art classroom. So to look at my project specifically in parts, different layers that I uncovered as I researched. One of the first things that I wanted to look into was some amazing artists who are also visually impaired. So not only am I expecting my students in an art classroom to be able to try to find success in art, I wanted to bring them resources where people who may live different lives are still creating art. So I first want to talk about John Brambit. So he was the first artist I found who was visually impaired, and a little bit about him is he has a visual memory. So that means that he wasn't blind from birth. He went blind later in life, but he used painting and art to take a hold of his life after he was diagnosed. He kind of went into a dark place, and he tried to bring art back into his life to bring more joy into his a daily life. He found a new confidence that he didn't know he possessed. He made a statement that before he had gone blind, he always had art in his life, but he was always kind of scared to take on painting. And so now that he's been given this new life challenge, he decided to take it on, and he's developed a really interesting technique with a very tactile sense. And he has a great viewpoint on color from someone who can't see. He remarks that color has a so immense and infinite amount of possibilities, especially when you have no visual limitation on it. And so it connects a lot to emotion and to feeling when he uses it in his artwork. Next, I want to talk about Jeff Hansen, who is a young philanthropist, and he has raised millions of dollars for charity with his art. So there are tons of celebrities and famous art collectors across the globe who own his art. He started to lose his vision at a young age. He doesn't let that stop his finding joy in the world. He often invites other people to paint with him, and he has a unique style that allows him to, again, like John Bramett, feel his artwork as he's making it. He speaks out about not letting his disability define him. He has incredible positivity and hope that radiates from his personality and his artwork. He uses his visual impairment not as a limitation, but as a superpower almost, so that he can continue to impact the lives of others. Lastly, the artist Rachel Gadsden is a painter and a performance artist. This work seen on this slide is an artwork done in honor of one of the soccer players from the FIFA Women's World Cup. I got the opportunity to see the artist create this painting through a promotional video, and you can really see how she uses her whole body to create the art. So she doesn't rely on the visual sense as much as a artist who does have full sight would. You can see how she uses her body to understand to understand her canvas and understand her materials as she continues to show the movement in the work that she creates. It was very powerful to see her fully express herself using her whole body. These artists are great examples to use in art education and in lesson plans to show your students how people are using the unique abilities that they've been given to make their own art. Another layer of my research and my experience with this line of work is having the experience of interviewing students about the relationship to the arts. So I got the chance to talk with 3 young women at KU who were all visually impaired, and I got to kind of dive into what their experiences have been in the arts. So they could recall many art experiences and were really excited to share those experiences and just the idea of being part of the arts in general. They talked about museums and hands-on experiences they've had in the past. For me, it was exciting to see how excited they were about going to museums, even though sometimes a museum is often designed for the visually abled person or patron. They talked about different materials and projects they have done in the art room. They did all agree that they felt that they couldn't be good at drawing because drawing is one of the least tactile forms of art. If you think about you have a piece of paper and just a pencil, there's not much of a raised surface to work on. And so instead, working with clay or materials from nature, they had more of an ability to connect with the art materials and make something they felt success in. One of the students recalled a remarkable experience with her art teacher where he encouraged her to try everything, and together they would find out what worked best for her. By opening a door to freedom of different choices instead of setting limits, it gave the student and the artist in the classroom more chances for success and exciting results. Lastly, my research would be nothing without the articles and research that I did in preparation to fully understand this topic. I read many articles and resources to research how others have approached this problem art education. The first thing I wanted to understand was visual impairments in general. What does that mean for education and for lifestyle? The thing I really pulled from my research in visual impairments in general was that there was a fear that society has developed because of the connection between sight and relationships and communication. It turns out that losing your sight is one of the top fears that our society has because of that connection on our relationship with others, depending on visual cues and body language when we relate to others. Even with the personal experiences I had with some visually impaired students, I was nervous going into the conversations with not having a total understanding about how they take on their lifestyle, but they were open to share little things about how they live life maybe a little differently. One of my biggest aha moments during this project was in interviews with those students as I was listening to the excitement as they told me stories about their art education, and I was taking notes, and suddenly the situation got a little tense, and I could tell that they thought I was uninterested in what they were saying. Little did I know that they had no idea I was taking notes because that's a visual cue that I would rely on. And so as soon as I explained to them what I was doing, the tension was released and they understood. That's one of the little things that is easily adapted to understand how a student with visual impairments might learn a little differently. After I learned about visual impairments on a general level, I did a little bit more research on how art teachers and artists adapt their materials for the visually impaired and important considerations for the art room specifically. This really got me focused in on how important it was to handle those adaptations and changes from the lesson appropriately to best benefit the student. I found that in the curriculum I developed, which I'll talk about a little later, that it's important to include artists who are visually impaired or who have different abilities in your lessons to bring an awareness in the classroom community about how all people can find success. Lastly, I did some research into museums and how they work with the visually impaired. When we think about art in a public setting, often our minds go to museums that past our normal education and schooling, our relationship to arts often is in those museum settings. I found some interesting progress as these museums are continue to change and adapt to work with patrons as they come in and to be able to adapt the experience so that they can have a successful museum experience. One specific example of this progress is in the Prado, this famous art museum in Spain. There was an exhibit where the museum curators had created their own process to make 3D artwork that patrons could come in and touch. It was important that they considered the way that visually impaired patrons would understand the painting. So one thing that's not always considered is that people with visual impairments have some residual sight. And so it was important to make these paintings as accurate as possible in color, as well as having the touch aspect be natural to human existence. Now I'm going to take a brief look into the curriculum that I developed within this research. I decided it was important to develop a lesson for each stage of development in education. So I developed an elementary lesson, a middle lesson, and a high school lesson. And so a lot of these lessons have to do with a tactile sense and trying to push our ideas past the visual when we bring art into the classroom. This first lesson is about printmaking, when it talks about collagraphs and making almost a collage that you can use then to print with. I have this as an elementary lesson where students will explore all their senses, especially touch, through collage and collagraph printmaking process. The students will use blindfolds to view and make art in a different way. This is an important lesson to start the idea about how visual arts can be more than visual and they can include our different senses. This is an introduction to that idea that will be further developed through the curriculum. In my middle level lesson, I focus on collage and the idea how different senses can unlock memories. And so students will explore and remember important memories using more than their visual sense. They will use other senses such as touch, smell, taste, and even hearing maybe, to create representation of that memory in a tactile collage using materials that can be felt, smelt, heard, or tasted. Students will begin to understand how multiple senses make up our everyday experiences and how there are different ways for us to see. So the important part about this lesson is for students to think about memories in more than just a visual sense. It's often that we can smell something and it's connected to an important memory, or we're in a place where we experience something that gives us almost a sense of deja vu that can link to memory. So it's important to think about all those senses when we're considering memories and creating a piece of art. My last lesson is for a high school level, and it brings more of a critical thinking lens to our education than just making. So students will engage in meaningful conversations about the way art is displayed, especially in museum settings. They will challenge the rules and norms of these established display places, and think in terms of adaptations and making the space accessible for all people, not just for those who are traditionally abled. Practicing conversations about diversity and disability will prepare the students to be better leaders in their future. So I think it's important to have conversations in the art room as well, and you can really foster those conversations, especially in a high school level. This lesson has the students making as well as discussing, but it's important to really show them that students can be makers of change, and they have the power to bring their own beliefs to the world. So, in conclusion, some of the discoveries I've made throughout this process of research, curriculum development, and just reflection on different ideas is that it's important to celebrate differences, both in the classroom and as a lifestyle. Those differences can be reflected in the diversity of artists you showcase to your students. You bring acceptance into the classroom when you show students differences in abilities and differences between artists. The next thing is emphasizing the artistic experience. And so I talk about the word experience, that we can do more than view art. We can use all five senses to experience art and to be present in an artistic environment. One of the important things that a museum holds as part of society is a place to experience art and to also be around others who are sharing in similar experiences. It's important to inform students and colleagues to eliminate that fear based on the discomfort of not knowing or being uninformed. It's important to push past our comfort zone and continue to develop improved communication and relationship skills with all kinds of people. And lastly, one of the important things you can do as an educator in today's world is encouragement to make change. Use the art classroom as a space for safe conversation and as an initiative to share a disposition to openness and acceptance to others. Thank you for taking some time to listen to what I have to share about this topic, and I hope as art educators and as people, we can take some of these ideas into our daily lives to bring an acceptance to others and appreciate our artistic experiences of daily life. Thank you for watching.